races in the St. Louis area, but one race that you need to pay attention to is a 5K run walk. It's called the Race for Reconciliation, and it's going to be held June the 14th, 2025 on Delmar. We're going to find more out about that on St. Louis in Tune. Welcome to St. Louis in Tune, and thank you for joining us for fresh perspectives on issues and events with experts, community leaders, and everyday people who make a difference in shaping our society and world. I'm Arnold Stricker, along with co-host Mark Langston, who is on assignment today. Folks, we're glad that you've joined us today. We want to thank our sponsor, Better Rate Mortgage, for their support of the show. You can listen to previous shows at stlintune.com. Please help us continue to grow by leaving a review on our website, stlintune.com, Apple Podcast, or your preferred podcast platform. Our return to civility today is something that is important because it's really impacting the St. Louis area right now. Since the tornado has gone through, you see many neighbors helping neighbors, and that's a great, great thing to see. You also see individuals selling things. I saw a little girl selling lemonade, and she's going to donate all the proceeds to helping those who have been impacted by the tornado. And that's what our return to civility is. Buy something from the neighbor's kid who's selling stuff to raise money for a good cause. It helps develop strong community, and it gives a kid a sense of accomplishment. We see the aftermath of the tornado, many on the news, many have seen it in person. And those individuals who have gone through that, who have lost roofs, they've lost their entire home, they've lost all of their belongings, they don't have anywhere to turn, and many don't have insurance. And that's very sad. And what we need to do is reach out in our community and help them out. And this is one way that you can do that. Maybe you've got something that's sitting around, you want to sell it and donate that money, or maybe you just have extra money, or maybe you just want to give some money to help, or maybe you want to be involved and help the cleanup. And that's something that you can do through the City of St. Louis website, so find that out. But buy something from the neighbor kid who's selling stuff to raise money for a good cause. We have another good cause that we're going to be talking about today. It is the Race for Reconciliation 5K, which is going to be held on Delmar, and that is going to be coming up as what I'm going to call a starter for the Juneteenth celebration in the Loop area. The race is June the 14th, and it will begin at 8:30. And on the line is Brandon Wilkes. He's going to be speaking to us about that. He's the executive director of the St. Louis Reconciliation Network. And Brandon's no stranger to what I would call events, sporting events, because he's, folks, we got to understand that he's an the Ohio State University fan. I have to put "the" in there, and he's very unique in this aspect. He is married to his high school sweetheart since 1997. He currently leads a house church with his wife called People's Church in St. Louis, which they planted in 2017. He's previously worked for Procter & Gamble and has a bachelor's in environmental studies and a master's in biblical studies, and he's the executive director of the St. Louis Reconciliation Network, which is an organization that equips churches and their leadership in the area of multi-ethnic ministry, and he also co-leads Together STL with Marco Van Ralton with a mission to bring God's people together so that miracles can happen. Brandon, welcome to St. Louis in Tune.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So are you a runner too, by the way?
Oh, I am not a runner. So I said, I can make my way around a 5K course, and I can pretty much run it, but I'm not running it well. My daughter, who is a runner, she's a runner. Actually, she was cross country and track, and she runs 5Ks all the time, and she's the real runner. Me, I can make it through the course.
I'd probably walk the course. My knees can't take running. I'm only supposed to run unless I'm going to get hit by a car.
Or chased by a dog.
So how did this all start? The race. I know last year we had some folks on to talk about the Juneteenth celebration, and this was a kickoff for that, and it's going to be the annual thing now?
Yeah, I hope so. We have a great partnership with the Delmar East Loop Business Association. They're doing their Juneteenth celebration, and we do our race, and we feel like it's a good partnership, so we hope to keep it going every year. It's been good so far. So last year, you're correct, was our first year collaborating, and we are the kickoff event for the June 14th Delmar Loop Juneteenth celebration. But we've been doing that since 2016.
Okay.
The purpose of our race is to promote racial unity in St. Louis. Our tagline is building unity one step at a time. And we feel like an event like this really gives opportunity for St. Louisans all over metropolitan area to come and say, you know what, we understand that St. Louis has gotten a bad reputation around racial history, and some of it very deservedly, but the St. Louis of the past doesn't have to be the St. Louis of the present nor the future. And we believe that events like this can help people come together and just express themselves to say, hey, we are a city that desires racial unity, that loves our diversity and promotes that.
That's one thing that I appreciate in the things that I've read is that St. Louis no longer needs to be defined by its past. When you moved to St. Louis with your family, were you surprised at the attitudes or the vibe that was going on in the city?
Yes, very much. So we moved here in 2014. We were it was two things. We were planning a church, and my wife worked for Express Scripts. And so it was really a thing that brought us here to St. Louis. And we came in the spring of 2014, before the tragedy happened with Michael Brown, the ensuing situation and everything that happened in Ferguson. We were very surprised. At that point in time, it was recognizing that the city had division even before it was expressed in such a loud and global manner with what happened with Michael Brown and the uprising that happened in Ferguson afterwards. And so it was something we were like, wow, this is surprising. But one thing I should say is that we came from Cincinnati. And a lot of people don't know this, but Cincinnati in 2001 had a similar situation happen, and Cincinnati was able to grow as a result and come out of that, I think, in a better light than it went into back in 2001 with the killing of a young African-American man named Timothy Thomas.
What do you think was the difference in Cincinnati for them moving through that and progressing? What do you think was the basis for that?
I really feel like, so my perspective probably is a little bit biased, and you probably ask a few different people this a different way, but we were part of a church called People's Church in Cincinnati, and we were already doing the work of racial unity in the city. And in 2001, when this happened, we had already had a small group of pastors who would get together and really talk about how can we really become a united church in Cincinnati. And our church desire was to reflect the community that we lived in. And so we did a lot of work in building networks. So when that happened, we really decided, you know what, we're going to jump in with 2 feet and begin to have this conversation about race and ethnicity and how the church should be involved, but also how the civic authorities should be involved. And when we began to have that conversation more cohesively, it really began to make things change. The business partnerships that came about, there's some pretty major corporations in Cincinnati, Procter & Gamble, General Electric, Kroger, Chiquita Banana. There are some large organizations there that really came together and said, you know what, we don't want our city to have this stigma attached to it. And they wanted to make some changes and really address the issues that had been there. And what was interesting is that they allowed the church to be in the room to have these conversations. And I think that the business environment, the church environment, and maybe not so obvious, but when businesses say things happen, the government kind of gets involved. And so the CEOs were able to get the mayor in town and get the chief of police involved and the church involved. And having those conversations really began to say, hey, this is and all pastors, not just, large church pastors or what have you, it's all pastors that were willing to get involved. So we had a multi-ethnic of pastors that got together, and when we began to have those conversations, things really began to change. So when issues came up in the future, it wasn't an issue where the people or the public or the minority public especially didn't feel heard because their pastors were already involved and said, hey, you know what? We understand the tragedy has happened. We've already had communications with the police department. In fact, they reached out to us when the incident happened. We understand what's going on, so let's now talk about it. And man, I tell you, since that 2001 incident, Cincinnati had some very tragic situations that happened, but they didn't turn out the same way with the riots and the uprising that happened before because of this church, civic, and business collaboration that came out as a result. So I feel like that's one thing that St. Louis needs to have, and I would love to be a part of the conversation with some major businesses and corporations saying, hey, we want to help change this as well.
Is that something you think I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm already involved with churches that say that they want something to change, but we haven't heard the business community really step out.
That's interesting. I know that they get involved sometimes with city government, and like you said, when it starts pressing on their bottom line, but they've not really reached out to the faith-based community. They've not reached out to the church. And has that been kind of surprising to you?
I think the surprising aspect is that the surprising part is that the business community hadn't been more vocal around the aspect of wanting St. Louis to have a different outcome or a different reputation, and really pressing into that from a unity perspective. Some of it, I believe, has to do with some of the larger corporations from St. Louis leaving. When Anheuser-Busch is no longer here, Monsanto is no longer here. They exist, but they're owned by multinational collaboratives. So I think when those businesses leave, there's no longer the stronger voice. But I feel like there's some that are still here that could shout a little bit louder, saying, hey, this stigma that St. Louis has around segregation and being separate of the past can be different than the future. And I don't think they don't desire it. I think they do desire it. If they would be more vocal, then the church would respond, and I think the city would be forced to respond from a civic perspective. So.
At Better Rate Mortgage, we love talking to people about mortgages. If you are researching, house hunting, ready to buy, or refinancing, it's time for a better mortgage experience. At Better Rate Mortgage, a better rate is just the beginning. BetterRateMortgage.com. NMLS ID 2401335, an equal housing lender. This is Arnold Stricker with Mark Langston of St. Louis in Tune. We're talking to Brandon Wilkes. He's the executive director of the St. Louis Reconciliation Network. And Brandon, I want to shift back a little bit to the race because you do have a lot of business sponsors for the race.
Yes.
And that's very good to see. Not only spreads the strength out, but allows more people to be involved and see what's going on. What's the real goal? We've touched on it a little bit, but let's get a little deeper on the goal of the race. It's not just running another 5K race. It's not raising money, folks, but it's really to bring our community together. Let's get into some of the weeds on that, Brandon.
Yeah, that's exactly it. When I think of goals and I think of visions, I'm thinking in the near future, I would love to have Delmar full with 5,000, 10,000 people out there saying, we in St. Louis are passionate about racial unity, about diversity, about equity in our city. We love the fact that we are a city that has a lot of immigrant communities and that come together. And we're passionate about that. And this is a walk-run to help express that vocally, to say we act about racial unity. And so I would love for the race to become that. Now, we're not there yet, but we're getting there. Our goal for this year is we will have over 600 people come out this year. Last year we had over 400. So we're looking to increase, and so far we're looking like we are. But we really hope that it becomes an expression of St. Louis as a whole that says, hey, we desire unity, and we don't want to be known as the city that has the Delmar divide, which so many people know about because it is really the icon of the railroad and the tracks of separating African Americans to the north of Delmar, non-African Americans south of Delmar. The fact that the BBC put that documentary out says, okay, internationally, St. Louis is known for being divisive, and we don't think that has to be the case. And so that's what we hope that this race would do. It would be a point where so many people from St. Louis can come out and say, hey, I want to be a part of the solution, and I want to express that in this small way by coming out and walking or running with some great people.
Yeah, it would be great to, rather than have the Delmar divide, have the Delmar unite, because, folks, the commitment is building unity one step at a time, and the race is... Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, that's why we're having it on Delmar.
Right.
That was really the genesis of saying we want to flip the narrative of what Delmar is known for. That we really think that there's an aspect of just saying and promoting Delmar as being a unifying street within the city. We have a wonderful Delmar Loop district right next to two awesome universities, which we know brings in a great number of students and people from all over the globe come to those SLU and WashU. I mean, two really outstanding universities in our city are right on these near Delmar area. Why can't Delmar be known for so many great things that happens? Great businesses down there, a great community. If you've ever been down, I'm sure you have been down to Delmar, the vibe on a Friday night or a Saturday, it's wonderful. And music icons that are known for having there. There's so much stuff that happens down there. But you know what we're noticed for internationally? It being the segregation line. It should be different. And so I feel like the Racial Reconciliation 5K, we hosted that on Delmar specifically to change the narrative of what Delmar is. It could be a street known for unity instead of division. So.
I want to give a website, folks. It's STLR, the number 4, R.com. STLR, and then the number 4, R.com. The race is, you have to sign up for this, correct?
Yeah, you have to sign up at the website that you just gave. People can register, and within the registration, so the goal of the race is to promote racial unity. There is a cost to it because we have a lot of great race partners, a Big River Running that's making sure it's a 5K race, and we get the streets blocked off, and we hire police. And so it's a great environment thing that happens. So it does cost to make these things happen. So there's a cost to the race. But we have some great race partners that are doing some great work in the city, and these are all nonprofits. So people can come out and they can walk or run in support of an organization. And you were saying a lot about the tornado this past week, which has been devastating. We've had the opportunity to serve down in the city. And we have one of the organizations is a race partner. It's called Restore St. Louis. Restore St. Louis has been located in North St. Louis. It's a ministry that's been helping for 30 years. They've been there before the tornado. They're going to be there after tornado. They've been a hub to help distribute food and to clean up houses and stuff like that. So they're one of our race partners. So if someone who wants to run and support organizations that's doing tornado relief, they can run and they can select I'm running in support of Restore St. Louis, and their registration fees actually go as a donation to that organization, too. Wow. So there are other organizations that are doing some great work as well, which they can look at and find out about, but that's one that's in the midst of the tragedy that we just went through is doing some great work.
So, folks, it's a family-friendly event. You can do the 5K run walk. It's a timed run walk. Then there's the 1 mile course. That's untimed. And then there's the 5K virtual run. Is that what? Explain that one to me.
Yeah. So that's for people who are passionate about unity in St. Louis, but they can't make it down there. I believe it or not, I have several people who sign up to do the virtual walk from different states.
Wow.
They're like, you know what? We're passionate about unity. They're either from St. Louis or they know some people who are actually doing it in St. Louis. And they're saying, I'm doing it in support of I'm running with my family who's going to be there in person. But I live in North Dakota, so I'm not coming. So giving people the opportunity to be there, to run in their own neighborhood if they're not in St. Louis. If you're in St. Louis, we want you to come down on Delmar. But if you're not, then you can do it wherever you're at.
Do you need more volunteers? I know you had volunteer information on the website.
Yes, we do. We need volunteers. Our biggest need for volunteers is really we call them race course rangers and cheerleaders. So it's people who help people who are running or walking on the course to stay on course. Now, we have phones and gates and stuff like that. So it's not really difficult, but we want to make sure it's always a safe environment. We don't want to make sure that no cars drive on the course because it's Delmar. It's a main thoroughfare through our city. So we need people to stand at the gates to want to make sure when cars come, they can say, hey, here's a way to go around the race. And when people are going by, to cheer for them. Because, everybody whether you're walking or running, you want some cheerleaders. That's why sports teams have them.
Absolutely.
To have people to cheer people on. So, yeah, but we need need like 30 or 40 people to volunteer, but they can go to that same registration page. And instead of clicking on where you can register for the race, you scroll down just a little bit. It says volunteer, and they can click here, and it'll show all the open volunteer spots. So we definitely need volunteers.
That website again, folks, is STLR, the number 4, R.com. STLR, number 4, R.com. Brandon, can you briefly talk about your work with Together STL? What is Together STL all about? Let's let our folks know about that.
Yeah, Together STL, Marco Van Routen and myself, we are both passionate about seeing the church come together in unity in St. Louis. So the way we do that is we create spaces where God's people come together so that miracles can happen. So we believe that when people of faith come together and get in the room around a similar passion or desire, then miracles can happen. So we do that in two different ways. One, we do pastoral collaboratives. So we come together in a community. We try to bring pastors that are already in that community together to say, hey, what can we do together that we can't do as individual churches? Meaning they're churches that are doing great things. They do outreach from their church. But wouldn't it be great if all of them came together and said, how can we serve our community? How can we get together with whether it's the officials in our city or schools, or maybe it's just neighborhoods as a whole, and do it as a collaborative effort as opposed to individual churches. So our desire is to have those all over the city and have just pastors getting to know each other and coming together, work together. One thing that I've always had a lot of questions from people who are either even in the church or not in the church is say, you know what, I walk through my neighborhood and I see 6 or 7 different churches,
right,
all in the same. Why so many churches? And I wonder if those churches are even working together, because I'll see one church on one side of the street and another church on the other side of the street. Why is that? And it's confusing. And it's because they're different denominations and so forth. But what if those churches work together and they just did collaboratively? They utilize whether it be their facility together, but also the people who attend there work collaboratively. I think there could be so much more that gets done. And so that's what we're trying to do. And we've had great success in that. We started 4 new collaboratives this year. And so we're loving that. And pastors are really enjoying the fact that there's somebody outside of the neighborhood who's and kind of organizing that so that they don't have to do it themselves. They want to do it, but they're very busy. And so it's easier if someone who's come in and help make those meetings happen. So that's one thing we do. The second thing we do, we call them focus teams. And that's bringing, often it's churches, but also nonprofits together to do the work that they do collaboratively. So we have a housing focus team where we have organizations like the FAM come together and other crisis housing come together and ask the question, what can we do together that we can't do as individuals for the city as a whole? And so we organize those meetings just to help nonprofit Christian organizations work collaboratively. We have an immigrant focus team meeting where we bring different agencies that want to work and care for immigrants who are coming to the city to see what they can do together that they can't do as individuals. So we have a racial unity focus team, which helps to put the race on with myself and other things that are happening during what we call Racial Unity Week, which is that whole week of June 14th through June 21st, where we have different expressions of things happening. So yeah, that's what Together STL does. We help bring God's people together so that miracles can happen, primarily through pastor collaboratives and focus teams.
And how long has that Together STL been going on here in the St. Louis area?
We are just getting started. So Marco and I, we began it about a little over 2 years ago.
Okay.
We came together in the city. We saw each other. We would go and connect with pastors and go to meetings and gatherings, and we kept running into each other. And we had a few lunches, and we said, we're doing the work of unity is really collaboratively together. Mine primarily in the area of racial unity through the St. Louis Reconciliation Network, and his primarily denominational unity through, it was an organization that he called Gateway Metro United. And we say, we're doing unity work. We really desire to do unity work. Why don't we do that together? And so we called it an experiment. Let's try to see how we could work collaboratively. And we found the strength in working collaboratively was huge. Just us coming together, we began to do a lot more things than we could individually. And so that's where it really Together STL came from. We said, what if we just help people come together and do this work? And so, for the last a little over 2 years, we've been doing that, and we just formalized it into a 501c3 just 6 months ago, and we decided we wanted to do the work first and then start telling people what we were doing instead of tell people what we're going to do and then start doing it. We said, you know what, let's let this let our work actually show what we're doing as opposed to us just trying to say what we're doing. That's what we've been doing.
So I want to encourage everyone, if you have the time and you're a runner or a walker, or even if you want to do this run and walk virtually, or if you have time to volunteer, it's the Race for Reconciliation 5K. It's being held June the 14th at 8:30 a.m. on Delmar. And does the race start where in the loop does the race start, Brandon?
So it starts at the corner of Hamilton and Delmar. So Delmar is the address in which you could go to. But so we're more in the East Loop, but the race actually goes from the East Loop to the West Loop. So we're working with an organization called Delmar Main Street, and they're a nonprofit organization that really is for the benefit of Delmar Boulevard as a whole. And so when we began working with them last year, they were helping to have the East Loop and the West Loop collaborate together, because the East Loop is St. Louis City and the West Loop is University City. So you got this whole city-county thing with St. Louis, which was another surprise to me when I moved here. I'm like, really? So St. Louis, division in St. Louis is something that is ingrained, and we have to break that. But so we are really hoping to promote Delmar from the city to the county, from St. Louis City side to University City. So the race starts at 5900 Delmar Boulevard. We run west all the way into U City in the loop. We'll loop around, I think it's Leland Avenue, which is pretty close to Vintage Vinyl. And we'll come back, and then we head east, back into the city, cross Tinker, all the way down to Delmar Divine, which is that new nonprofit center down there, which is a great building that's happening there. We'll loop around Delmar Divine, then we'll head back west again on Delmar to cross the finish line exactly where we started. And we're at 5900 Delmar. That's also where the Juneteenth celebration is. So as soon as our race ends, which is it's ambiguous time because people walk and run at different paces, but it'll probably be somewhere around like 9:30. The Juneteenth celebration is going to be already have food trucks there. There's going to be a bounce house. There'll be music playing. So there'll already be stuff happening. So we're hoping that people come down to support racial unity. We'll also enjoy the festivities for the Juneteenth celebration as well. That's great, Brandon. Brandon, thanks for talking to us about this. I appreciate it. Folks, a great thing to help support building unity one step at a time. It's the Race for Reconciliation 5K, June the 14th at 8:30. And you can go to STLR, the number 4, R.com to register if you want to do that race or if you want to help volunteer. Brandon, thanks again for being with us on the show. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad you had me. All right. You take care, sir. You do the same. Thank you. Bye-bye. Folks, a great race, and I want to really encourage you to do that. And even if you are not a runner, even if you just like to walk, or if maybe you want to be one of those encouragers on the side, as Brandon was talking about, and you see these in those big marathons, that's a long time. And for some folks, 5K is a long time. Everybody needs a little encouragement, maybe get a little water, peps up the people who are running and walking, and it makes the race that much more enjoyable. So I want to encourage you to do that. Again, the website is STLR, the number 4, R.com, STLR, the number 4, R.com. And we're grateful that Brandon Wilkes was able to take some time out of his schedule and speak to us. So that's a very important event, and we're going to let that speak for itself. That's all for this hour. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can listen to additional shows at stlintune.com. Consider leaving a review on our website, Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and continue to grow. I want to thank Bob Berthasell for our theme music, our sponsor, Better Rate Mortgage, our guest, Brandon Wilkes, and co-host Mark Langston, who's on assignment. And we thank you, listeners, for being a part of our community of curious minds. St. Louis in Tune is a production of Motif Media Group and the U.S. Radio Network. Remember to keep seeking, keep learning, walk worthy, and let your light shine. For St. Louis in Tune, I'm Arnold Stricker.